And I kept thinking, well, what great world folklore has been left unmined, untapped as a seam of ore. It took me a long time for the penny to drop and the light bulb to switch on and say, well, hang on a second. You've got experience with Japanese myth. You've spent 5 years in the country. You understand the culture. You've got a unique insight, because I think one reason that Japanese myth is so unknown, really, in the West is the language barrier. And Japanese culture can be quite impenetrable to the outsider, uh, deliberately so, I think, in some ways. And I thought, since I've got the facility with the language, I can read and write Japanese to some degree, and having lived there, I thought, this is perfect. Why not use Japanese myth and see if we can bring that to a Western audience? So that was my starting point. Japanese folklore is very rich and varied. I mean, historically, you've had um, you know thousands of villages spread across the islands, separated from each other, a bit like with the UK. And so each village had its own traditions, even its own dialects and its own stories. And it's only relatively recently, again with Europe and the Brothers Grimm, that people started to pay attention to those folk tales and to sort of collect them and start to record them. And it doesn't go back far, about 100 years, 150 years, the likes of Lafcadio Hearn and other people started to catalogue these stories. So when I came to look at them, it was really an untapped vein. A lot of these stories were not familiar in the sense of the characters and some of the social customs and mores and some of the reasons people did things, for family duty, for example. But also there were the unique creatures that inhabit the Japanese psyche, and some of those are a synthesis of ideas such as traditional animistic faith and religions, along with Buddhist influences. I mean, a good example is the Tengu, which is a very famous Japanese creature. It's a bird demon, but it evolves over time, and it goes from being a chaotic, troublemaking creature that tricks people and makes them eat dung and things like that, and over the centuries, it takes on other aspects of adopting Buddhist principles. And the modern Tengu is almost like a monk, and its bird-like qualities have faded in time, and the beak has become a nose. So, as I say, it's a very complex, very varied mythology. And what's also different too is the Japanese don't have a clear black and white view of good and evil the way that Western myth often does. And often creatures are much more ambivalent in their attitudes, and they will help and hinder equally. And in the same way that they may be on one day obstructive, they can be helpful. So there really is a lot of fluidity within the Japanese myth and folklore. And I wanted to sort of bring some of that to a wider audience because, as I say, it's a rich, deep, complex set of stories. And the other thing too is the universality, because when you look at myth, almost every culture in the world, even if you were to discover a tribe in the Amazon that never made contact, they would have stories explaining away the natural world. And a lot of those stories we will have cognates for, we'll find similarities to in our own stories. Again, for example, we know I mentioned Greek myth, so we have the Medusa, the idea of a woman with half human, half snake. You have the Naga in Indian mythology, and also in Japan they have the Nureona, which features in the first book, which again is a half woman, half snake hybrid creature. So different cultures separated by thousands of miles still come up with similar concepts when it comes to myth to explain away certain ideas. So the universality as well as the uniqueness, two of the aspects I wanted to bring across.